So we're going to talk about Dagger, which I see. I want to make a note that uh, the title, which leads you to think there must be some sort of betrayal a la Shakespeare, and this play really destroys Shakespeare. This is sort of like the sort of plays that O'Neill would write using the Greeks in mind, and the distance between Shakespeare and this play is even greater than between O'Neill and the Greeks. Um, I This is probably my favorite play outside of the Kubla Khan play that we're going to talk about later. I remember you telling me about it. You saying that you were not necessarily struggling, but taking your time throughout this play. That you wanted to make it more dense, and that when I read it, I wouldn't necessarily see that you were quote unquote struggling. And I really did it. It's a very well put together play. I can see different layers on all of the characters, and even some of the side characters are very well defined. Down to just a few lines, you get not necessarily a whole character's life, but you get a sense of the character, like with Donald Mall.
Well, yeah, and just before you go on, I just wanted to say that the thing about this is one of those plays that only someone who is a great poet, or truly great poet who wrote great poetry, not like people say Tennessee Williams was a poet of the theater, but a truly great poet. The way I deploy not only my but other quotes from other poems in here really heightens attention. This is something that I do better than anyone who's ever written for drama has ever done, is deploy poems, whether they're my poems, or even if you want to consider the lyrics of songs poems, as in the musical that I did. But this is one of those that really does use poetry well.
And it begins with you reading your poem War, which is supposedly one of your early great poems. We meet the character named Desi or Desdemona.
Yeah, Desi.
Then we also meet this Patty Mildred Flexner, the talentless Desdemona.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too. Desi apparently has some talent, whereas there's this talentless nominal doppelganger out there that doesn't really bring anything to it. We don't get to really know her that well, but we do get Desi's resentment towards her for taking the same name, and then having them associate this talentless hack with her, who has at least some poetic talent.
Well, this is no. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You end up having a sexual relationship with her. And then there's a scene towards the end of the play that reminds me of the Super Seven with the what the hell is his name?
Elias Walker.
Yeah, Elias Walker, where he breaks up with his girlfriend at the end of it, or she breaks up with him rather.
Yeah. Well, basically, this is one of those things that I really almost just totally took from real life. I mean, obviously, I had to reconstruct situations and whatnot. But I mean, I had gone in the mid '90s, fall of '94, to this place called the New Power Generation, which was the name of Prince, the rock star's band. And Prince lived in Minneapolis, or in the Twin Cities area. And on Sunday afternoons from like noon to 2, they had poetry readings. And at the time, I would have been 29, 30. And most of the kids were a bit younger. There was a few older people, and a few older people just by 2 or 3 years. But I was one of the older ones. And there were these two Desdemonas. There was the fat white Desdemona, who was trying to be all hip hop and whatnot. And then there was the black Desdemona, who I called Desi. And I never really knew her real name. I think it was Denise Miller, like an actress from the 70s and 80s. We just sort of hit it off for about 6 weeks, from about a week or two before Christmas till right before my birthday. And, she lived right in what was known as the Uptown area. That was the artsy area of Minneapolis, the equivalent of the boho in New York, the Soho or boho area in New York, where I knew this Carissa Drake. And yet she was not like the Carissa Drake character. I mean, when I say she had the Desdemona with an A, the white Desdemona, was utterly talentless. she was nothing. She was a poseur, and she came after the Black Desdemona, and she's still in the Twin Cities area, as far as I know. But the Black Desdemona sort of just she was the archetype of these young people who are in the arts, who a year or two passes and they go from, oh, I want to be a poet, to I want to be a dancer, to, oh, I want to do uh, uh, knitting, to whatever, and they just sort of with the world ends not with a bang but a whimper. Their thing that makes them interesting is it just seeps away, and we get this was one of the plays too where I include some of the denizens of the Minnesota art scene, including we get the character Annabelle Ford Duggan, who was in Theodore. She was the rich gal, and there's a few other characters that are mentioned as well.
Wallet Claw King.
Yeah, yeah,
Only his claw.
right, and he was in. That goes back to my sixth play, Features,
Yeah.
where he was known as Chad then, but
and he lusts for Donald Mall.
Yeah.
There's this hilarious scene where you're reading your poetry and you get some applause.
Yeah.
Then he reads and gets no applause, but is making it seem as if there is applause coming out. And then Donald Mall comes out and reads something, and he's clapping like a little fairy throughout the entirety of it. So he's a very amusing character. There's also the Chad character too. I forget whether or not he made an appearance in Prior Pay. I don't think so.
No, Chad is the lover of that, and this really happened. Except that I didn't see the guy she was with. About 6 months after, which would have been mid '95, after this girl Desi, she moved out of the Uptown area, moved to a suburb of the Twin Cities called St. Louis Park, which had a half-price bookstore. So one Saturday or something, I'm going, I guess, to some arts event or whatnot. But an hour or two before I get there, I drive up to just go looking through the bookstores, and I saw her. And the scene was pretty much what it was, except you didn't have this Chad being such a little tool, popping in and saying, "Ooh, I found the book on this subject or whatnot." But yeah, and that was it. I mean, it was pleasant. I said hello, how you doing, and that was it. It was just a strangely dispassionate meeting. I mean, not that we were ever serious or anything, but I just never figured it out what her thing was. And then I do have, of course, a couple of scenes with what seems to be the Prince figure. Now, in real life, I never met the Prince figure. There was a little window, like a floor above the stage area where we'd be reading the poems. And I do remember whenever I would read, every so often, maybe I went there 10, 12 times, maybe about 3 or 4 of the times, there seemed to be a figure in a hood, which people said was Prince, but I never saw Prince. I remember like once or twice he gave me a thumbs up after I read a poem. But in this play, I expand that and have the character going, ooh, ooh, ooh,
And you also quote Emerson in Exactitude when he references it.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting scene. You called this the Prince play, I remember when you first sent it, but he shows up. There's only the one scene with the hooded figure that may or may not be Prince. The other character who's very interesting is the Kal Sharad character.
Yeah.
He is also a poet with some talent, but also a floater.
Yeah.
There's also a funny scene where you're arguing to each other and he calls you a racist and you say, Kyle, we're both white. And it goes from there. But I think that he's an interesting character in that you use him as an example with another woman who they both had a grotesque appearance, but she was a better person, whereas he was a slob and an asshole.
Yeah.
But they're grouped in together because of their appearance. You also include some of your board messages, which I looked up and I found the source of, between you and this sort of smart ass online.
Yeah. Well, this fellow Kyle Sherrod is based on a real person who died apparently last year around Christmas time. And the interesting thing is, I mentioned the character of Annabelle Ford Duggan, who's the main character in my play Theodore, and she was a woman who had HIV. And this Kyle character, I don't think I show it, but I reference it. How for about a year he went around stalking this woman, uh, heckling her at shows, and uh, Kyle Sherrod was fat. He was ugly. He was balding. He didn't bathe. I mean, he was a total wreck of a human being. And yet, when he died, they had a memorial for him at the same place they had a memorial for the pervert uncle of the beautiful gal that I wrote a play about earlier, who also died last year, in the same bar and whatnot. And people just spewing all of this crap about as if he was some kind of great person or humanist or whatnot. He was like this communist who denied Stalin and Mao killed millions. So there was a lot of issues. I had worked with him at AT&T. And I also go into this other crazy gal who had sort of, I guess, semi-stalked me by telephone, and then when I basically told her to shit or get off the pot, she claimed that I had been harassing her or whatnot. And when we got to court, I said to the judge, if you want the phone records, you'll see she called me 40 plus times. I answered maybe 5, 6, 7 times. Whatnot. Who the hell is stalking who? So these are all of these people that we see are fucked up. The Kyle Sherrod stalking the woman with HIV, the phone gal, the Claw King character, and these all provide the background. And then there's a couple of other characters or whatnot. The transsexual poet and the guy who hits on him, and then the prince character.
That scene was hilarious, where he hits on him and he is pretending that it's a woman when it's obviously a guy,
Yeah.
and he's trying to use it as a covert reason to sleep with him.
Yeah, and but that's in real life. The guy I sure was a closet case, but he was someone who hated homosexuals, hated black people and whatnot, and even though he was a minority person himself, but this is what it was. But you get through all of these scenes, you get to the ending at the bookstore with Danny and the Desi character, and then we get. I'm just scrolling here. I want to scroll to the end.
There's 2 scenes if you want to read them on page. Let me see, 97. You get the last paragraph. You have a scene where it ends, and then you end on the word "still," and then you rework that scene later on and say "still nothing." If you would read that scene on page 97, the last paragraph or so leading up to "still," and then 98 where it says "still nothing." Yes, Desi exited my life without rancor, and on from there. I thought that was a very interesting way to develop from there by giving the audience more information about what happened.
Yeah, and then I used the Whitman poem with the spider.
And the Wordsworth poem, "I wandered lonely as a cloud."
Yeah, well, and that one I really thought was a good one to describe her. And those ideas just come to me. Then, so I think the epigraph of this drama and the cogitative violence again goes back to the small spider in the break room at the Jarrell store that I work at. Danny moves slowly on stage. Blah, blah, blah.
Well, we haven't mentioned too the Rembrandt paintings that you use throughout the play.
Well,
the views.
Yeah.
Explain the significance of the Rembrandt paintings and what they got, because you have a blackout and then you have a painting and then it starts the next scene.
Yeah, well, Rembrandt, of course, did a series of, I don't know, a few hundred self-portraits that he did over his career, his life, his work career. And I just thought a number of them, some of them show him laughing as a young man, others show him more somber. Sometimes they are sort of connected with what's going on, in the sense of that it defines it. Other times it's a play off of it. So I don't. I just thought that they would work there, and I wanted something that was a good pause in between some of the scenes. They're just sometimes you just go with what emotionally you go with your gut instinct, and instinctively I thought this was a good place to use Rembrandt.
I have a question too that we can follow up on after this conversation. But do you have any of quote unquote Kyle's poems left? I'd be interested in seeing them because you said that you used them to loosen up your style as a poet.
Oh, there was one poem that I got at a poetry group, not the Uptown Poetry Group, that I do have one book of his, a chapbook that he had written. I think I gave it a 65 or a 70. He's one of these people that despite the claims to the contrary, he was so into wanting to be liked because he was so physically repulsive. He tried to kiss ass with people to be so liked. I think there's a scene of him that happened at an actual Borders bookstore where he's like literally shaking and sweating as this woman that he obviously had an attraction to for many years came to town to read from her shitty poetry. But I mean, there's nothing. If you were to look up the real person online, you wouldn't get a sense that he had any really great talent from the poems that you see online. I mean, a line or two here or there. But my guess is, over the years that I knew him, probably in the years that I lived in the Twin Cities, he maybe wrote maybe a handful of great poems. But then again, most of them were just this doggerel about politics and communism, and he never gave in totally to art, and that's a shame.
Do you have copies of those of some of his good poems?
No, I think I only have one poem that's probably in one of his chapbooks, but I don't know where the hell it is off the top of my head.
Okay.
And it's not something that I would say is particularly worth it. If you read my poem about snapshots fading to now, or something like that, or the one about Charlie Chaplin where he's doing the speech from the great dictator. Those are follow that kind of a pattern. But my poems are better actually. But what?
The Clouds in Hannah's Eyes?
The Clouds in Hannah's Eye, yeah. That one, and probably two or three.
It's interesting that you said that. That's one of the poems I thought may have been influenced just by the way that you described Kyle's poems.
Yeah, and the thing is, so while his poems, the one or two poems that I saw that were in that style were excellent to possibly near great, again, just like in this play where it's not just about meeting a girl, there are multiple layers. My poems have deeper layers because I can think in multiple levels where someone like Kyle couldn't.
And you said his best stuff was usually just personal.
Yeah, those ones like when he would actually write about something on a personal level. When he tried to write politically correct poems, they were usually crap. So